When she reaches the cottage, Moira finds a small grave. She steps down to find it belonging to Robin's father. She pays her respects before walking the horse to the weathered stable and heads inside. There is no sign of Robin or any inhabitants, and hadn't looked like there had been for a while. The cottage was fully furnished and hadn't been touched by looters. The table that sat in the center of the main room still had place settings for two. Moira assumed his father anxiously awaited Robin's return. She lights the fireplace and falls asleep on the floor, watching the embers dance in the flames. A caravan carrying goods was passing along the road into Sherwood Forest. The road was the quickest travel route to and from Nottingham, and frequently traveled between kingdoms by traders, although the road was believed to be guarded by a group of thieves. The caravan stopped about 2 miles into the forest when its path was hindered by a fallen tree. "Is there another way around?" asked the messenger from inside the forefront carriage. "You might see about turning back around," says Little John, revealing himself from behind a large oak tree. Several other men step out as well, surrounding the caravan. "I'll have you know these goods are for His Highness King John of—" informs the messenger, before being interrupted. Yes, we are very aware of whom these goods are intended," says John, signaling 10 of his men to start unloading the goods. 4 armed guards jump out, swords drawn, as the men approach. The messenger, feeling protected by his swordsman, steps out of the carriage. "These men are highly trained mercenaries hired by His Highness the King of France. I'm sure their skills are far more advanced than your little band of—" He stops mid-boast, eyes wide, and gulps down a knock that formed in his throat. An arrow had struck the carriage door beside the man, inches from his head. Another one followed as he let out a womanly scream. The men of Sherwood laughed, and Robin hopped down from a nearby tree and whistled. 5 archers hidden in the coverage of trees aimed their arrows at the mercenaries. "How do your swordsmen hold up against monster marksmen?" asked Robin. The men of Sherwood disarm the mercs and start unloading the caravan. Once they've taken everything, they send the men back the way they came, with a message to the King of France. "Let him know these roads are guarded by Robin Hood and his gang of married men. Any travelers hoping to deal their goods to the false King of Nottingham will be seized and sent on their way," says John. The goods are taken to the encampment, where the supplies are divided between the people. Only necessary goods are kept, and the rest are prepared to be distributed to the townspeople of Nottingham. They load down several horses and pose as traders when entering the town, bringing with them animal skins and meat. As they walk along the streets, they hear talks of a vigilante that took the king's horses and ran through the streets, spilling food stolen from His Highness. Robin and Little John look at each other. "Sounds like someone else is taking action against the king," says Robin. They pass out small handfuls of coin and food, secretively to several of the merchants and townsfolk. "Looks like you're a wanted man," points out Little John, gesturing to a reward poster as they enter the center of town. "Is 40 shillings all I'm worth to him?" says Robin, smiling confidently beneath his bandana. "Let it be known that those who steal from the king shall be punished," declares the town crier from the town square. "For aiding a thief, the punishment shall be 50 lashings and confinement to the stocks for 3 days' time." Robin and the men stopped and watched as the public punishment was sentenced. The sheriff rolls back his sleeves as he approaches the accused. The sight of him angers Robin, and he begins to worry about Moira. He thought about her being helpless against his wicked advances, but he knew she was strong and could manage herself until they reunited. The crier hands him a whip as a young woman is placed into the stocks and her dress ripped from her shoulders, exposing her back. "Ada?" questions Robin. The sheriff begins lashing her as she screams out in pain. Moira is in the crowd, shrouded from view, watching in horror as her friend is whipped. She quickly makes her way through the crowd, unable to tolerate the persecution, bumping into Robin without either of them taking notice of each other. Ada could barely stand in the stocks, her fair skin blistering and bruised from the ferocity of the lashing. Tears ran down her cheeks as she closed her eyes and turned her head, embarrassed by the indecency in which she was exposed. The sheriff eyed the crowd before heading into the castle to speak to the king. He finds him in the throne room with his advisers, who suspected the delivery they were waiting on had been obtained by the thieves of Sherwood. King John slams his fist against the throne. "May I have a word alone with his majesty?" requests the sheriff. "What is it?" asks the agitated king as he dismisses his council. "I request several guards be placed on patrol at the town square. I have reason to believe someone may have mercy on our prisoner and attempt to free her." "You're worrying about protecting a girl in the stocks, but what about my goods?" asked the king. "I've just been informed by the council that our goods from France were due to arrive this morning. It is now evening, and I've no supplies. I would like to send out a few patrols around the shire for any signs of the resistance, but I am limited on able-bodied men." The king grants the sheriff use of a small group of armed guards under the condition that he produces some results of his search for the resistance. That night, Moira sits by the fire at the Locksley cottage, eating a piece of bread and drinking a bottle of mead, crying at the thought of Ada. She quickly changes out of her dress into some men's clothes that she picked up on her way out of the city. When she reaches the outer wall of the city, she manages to loosen a few bars in the wall where sewage and water was disposed into a creek. She sneaks in and heads towards the town square. "Ada," she whispers. Ada lifts her head slowly, searching for the speaker of her name. Moira finds the coast clear and runs over. "Moira?" Ada recognizes the voice, but doesn't recognize her in her current attire and half-covered face. "What are you doing here? You must leave. I cannot leave you here like this." She grabs a lockpick from her belt and starts trying to pick the lock. "Bloody hell, I need more practice." She wiggles the pick, trying to pop the lock, when another figure emerges from the shadows. "Who are you?" asks Moira. "Who are you?" asks the other figure. He looks at her, fidgeting with the lock. "Let me try." "I got it," says Moira, still trying to pop the lock. "Now leave before you get us caught." "You're going to get yourself caught. Now move," he says, pushing her to the side. A nearby guard on patrol sees the pair trying to break out the prisoner. "Oi!" he yells. He goes to draw his sword as Moira removes a knife and throws it, hitting him in his shoulder. He yells out, causing a scene. The man pops the lock and frees Ada just in time. Moira grabs Ada and helps her away quickly. The man follows behind them, providing cover with his bows and arrow. "Here, let me take her," says the man, picking up Ada and carrying her behind a wagon of hay near a shack. They hide out of view as the soldiers search the streets. "I'll get her to safety," he says. Moira looks at Ada. There is no way she will be able to get her past the guards and out of the city now that they've been spotted. "You take care of her," she says, looking at the man fiercely, "or I will find you and gut you myself." "Agreed," he says. He looks around for a moment before removing an arrow from his quiver. "Get ready to run." He shoots an oil lamp hanging above a cart of goods, and it goes up in flames. Moira takes off and climbs a rickety shop roof, drawing the attention of the guards. Several more on patrol are drawn to her as she runs along the rooftops, allowing for the man and Ada to get away. She hops down into the streets, throwing 2 knives at the guards, blocking her escape route. She slides down through the hole and runs to her horse before taking off into the darkness. Moira makes it back to the cottage, but not without injury. She manages to gash her arm while sliding through the wall. She pulls out a small sewing kit and takes a drink from a bottle of mead. She holds the needle over a flame before threading it and pours a little of the mead onto the cut. Her fist tightens as the pain radiates through her arm. She takes the needle and begins to suture her injury. Late into the night, as she sleeps by the fire, she hears something from outside. She hides as the intruder walks into the cottage. He glances around at the fire and dress that is laying across the chair. He walks over to the bottle of mead sitting by the fireplace and suddenly feels the point of a sword at his neck. "What is your business here?" she requests, cradling her injured arm against her gown. The man holds his hand up slowly. Then very quickly he turns and disarms Moira, grabbing her good arm and twisting it behind her back. "Moira?" he says, surprised. He lets her go and pulls down his mask, revealing himself as Robin. Where? He can't find the words and immediately pulls her close for a kiss. "I've been so worried about you. Why'd you leave the castle?" "I couldn't stay, not with the sheriff there." He looks at her arm and back into her eyes. "Was that you trying to free Ada?" She stares at him for a second, realizing it was him that helped her escape. "You? Where is she? Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's being tended to at the camp. I came to pay my respects to my father. I was curious once I saw the smoke coming from the chimney." They soon hear horses riding in the distance. Moira grabs what she can of her belongings, and they head off to the tree line on their horses. They watch as the sheriff dismounts his horse and heads into the cottage with several soldiers. They then proceed to burn it down. Moira looks at Robin, whose eyes filled with anger. "We must go before they find us," she insists. They ride off towards Sherwood, leaving the cottage to burn. When they get to the camp, Robin helps Moira off her horse and introduces her to some of the men. "Moira, I'd like you to meet Little John and Duncan," says Robin. "Pleased to meet you," says Little John, bowing his head. "You as well. I don't mean to be rude, but I would greatly like to see Ada." "Right this way." Robin hands Moira off to Duncan to be taken to Ada, while he and Little John discuss the next shipment of goods. Moira is led into a dimly lit hut, where she sees Will cleaning the wounds on Ada's back. "Will," she says, relieved to see him alive. She gives him a hug and then walks over to the bed. "I'll see to her now." She takes the rag from his hand, and she is left alone with Ada. "Moira." She manages to smile. Moira grabs a cup of water and holds it to Ada's lips. "Rest." Robin walks in to check on the two and finds Moira dozed off in a chair beside Ada. He wakes Moira and takes her hand as he leads her up the steps to a small hut in the trees. He pulls back a curtain, revealing a small, cozy, lightly furnished room. She sees the 2 letters she wrote him while he was away, sitting on a small table. "I read them every day. I had written you a few more times, but I never heard back," he says. "I figured you'd found someone else to court. Someone you didn't have to worry about dying in battle." "There was no one else." She turns to him. "I was at a loss. One minute you're driving me crazy with your silly games, and the next you're telling me how much you adore me. I didn't know how to put my feelings onto paper." She walks over to him and takes his hand into hers. She notices a woven bracelet around his wrist, made of the ribbon he cut from her hair the day they dueled. She reaches into her satchel and pulls out the rose that was attached to the arrow he shot into her windowsill. She had preserved what was left by pressing it and keeping it wrapped in a small silk cloth. He smiles, touching his forehead to hers. She tilts her head up and gives him a kiss. He places his hands on her hips as their kiss becomes more arousing. He wraps his arms around her as he guides her over to the bed, laying her across a sheepskin blanket. He kisses her neck, sending her heart into a flutter. He rubs his hands up and down her gown and over her thighs. Moira, apprehensively, begins to unbutton the front of her gown. Robin pulls back the blanket and eagerly removes his clothes as they slide underneath, insulating the heat radiating off each other's bodies. "Robin," says Moira, feeling every inch of his bare skin against hers, gently places her hand on his cheek. "Be gentle." "Have you never—" he asks, noticing a concerned look in her eyes. Moira shakes her head bashfully. He positions himself between her legs, anxiously awaiting for what lies between them. For as long as he had known Moira, which was most of his life, he had never seen her look so vulnerable. She takes a deep breath as he enters her body. A sharp pain runs through her abdomen as she experiences intimacy for the first time. She places her hands on his chest and pushes back, wanting the pain to go away. "Robin," she gasps. "Shh," he says, placing one of his hands on hers and rubbing her hair with the other. "It only hurts for a moment," he reassures her, giving her body time to adjust to his full entry. "Was that your idea of gentle?" she scoffs jokingly. Robin giggles and begins gently maneuvering himself inside her. The pain begins to subside, and her skin shivers at the new sensation the light strokes of his manhood provided. "I never imagined," she starts, and then stops when she feels him rub against a part of her insides that sends her body into a frenzy of ecstasy. He passionately plunges inside her as she presses her body against his and opens her hips to take him deeper. He rhythmically motions his hips into hers, sending a sense of euphoria through her body that she never could have imagined was possible. Moira's body shakes from their passionate lovemaking as her and Robin come to a finish. He rolls over onto the bed and she places her head on his chest. "Are you all right?" he asks while wrapping his arms around her. "Elated," she says, giving him a smile. The two of them fall asleep, with Moira locked in Robin's arms, where he is content in knowing she is safe.